The sky bled crimson above the dusty silhouette of Pahrump Valley as Josephine Turner stepped off the stagecoach, her emerald eyes scanning the barren Nevada landscape with a mixture of trepidation and steely resolve. The year was 1869, and like many who ventured west following the Civil War, she carried little more than determination and dreams of gold. "Last stop, Pahrump," the driver called, tossing down her weathered leather trunk with little ceremony. Josephine winced as her precious belongings hit the ground, sending a small cloud of dust upward. At 24, she had left behind everything familiar in Boston, a respectable teaching position, a modest inheritance rapidly dwindling from her father's debts, and a marriage proposal from a man who wanted her docile and decorative. The Nevada territory represented something she craved more than security, possibility. "Need assistance, miss?" a weathered station master approached, eyeing her fine wool traveling dress that, despite its quality, already showed the stains of the arduous journey. "Thank you, no." Josephine straightened her back, attempting to appear more confident than she felt. "I require directions to the nearest boarding house and information about mining claims in the area." The station master's bushy eyebrows rose. "Mining claims, that's men's business, miss." "My business is my own," she replied curtly, retrieving a carefully folded newspaper clipping from her reticule, an advertisement boasting of Pahrump's untapped mineral wealth. "I've invested everything to come here, suit yourself," he shrugged, pointing down the dusty Main Street. "Mrs. Wilson runs the only decent boarding house in town, 3 buildings past the saloon. As for mining claims," he hesitated. "You might try the land office, though they ain't likely to take kindly to a woman's inquiries." Josephine nodded stiffly, reaching for her trunk. "I wouldn't do that if I were you." The deep voice came from behind her, causing her to turn abruptly. Standing there was a man whose appearance embodied the rugged frontier itself. Tall and broad-shouldered, his tanned face partially shadowed by a worn leather hat, he regarded her with interest in his amber eyes. "Your trunk," he explained, nodding toward it. "It'll tear your fine gloves to shreds, and these streets aren't kind to Eastern boots." Josephine bristled. "I'm perfectly capable, never suggested otherwise." He removed his hat, revealing sun-streaked brown hair. "Just offering a courtesy. I'm heading that direction myself." Something in his direct gaze made Josephine pause. Unlike the station master's dismissive tone or the leering looks from men on the stagecoach, his offer seemed genuinely without expectation. "And you are," she asked, not relinquishing her grip on the trunk handle, "Hayes Prescott." He extended a calloused hand. "Rancher." "My property's about 5 miles outside town." Josephine hesitated before accepting the handshake. His grip was firm but gentle. "Josephine Turner. Recently of Boston. Boston to Pahrump is quite a journey, Miss Turner." He lifted her trunk effortlessly, "especially for a lady traveling alone." "I follow opportunity, Mr. Prescott, not convention." She fell into step beside him, acutely aware of the curious glances from townsfolk. "I understand there are promising mining prospects in the area." Hayes gave her a sidelong glance that mingled amusement with something like pity. "You're about 2 years too late for the silver rush, and those who came then left mostly disappointed. The real fortunes in this valley aren't what most Easterners come looking for. I assure you, I've done my research." Josephine patted the newspaper in her reticule. "The Pahrump Valley mining enterprise promises substantial returns." Hayes stopped walking, his expression darkening. "That company, Miss Turner, is selling nothing but expensive desert dust and broken dreams." Before Josephine could respond, they arrived at a neat whitewashed building with Wilson Boarding House painted above the door. "Mrs. Wilson is fair and keeps a clean house," Hayes said, setting down her trunk. "A word of advice, if you'll permit it, don't mention your mining aspirations too loudly until you've learned more about the territory." "I appreciate your concern, Mr. Prescott, misplaced though it may be." Josephine straightened her travel-worn hat. "I plan to visit the land office tomorrow." Hayes replaced his hat, his expression unreadable. Then perhaps we'll cross paths again. Good day, Miss Turner. As he walked away, Josephine couldn't help watching his retreating figure, noting the easy confidence in his stride. Something about Hayes Prescott intrigued her, despite his dismissal of her plans. Still, she hadn't come all this way to be dissuaded by the first man who deemed her ambitions foolish. She would find her gold, with or without the approval of Parump's residents, Mrs. Wilson proved to be a robust widow in her 50s with shrewd eyes that assessed Josephine thoroughly while showing her to a modest but clean room on the second floor. "Dinner's at 6 sharp," she announced. "No gentlemen callers past 8, no liquor, no smoking. $2 a week, paid in advance." Josephine counted out the money from her dwindling funds. "I understand you've been here some time, Mrs. Wilson. What can you tell me about the mining prospects?" The landlady's expression softened slightly. "Oh, honey, you're one of those, are you? Let me give you the same advice I've given every starry-eyed newcomer. This valley takes more than it gives. Best learn that early." That evening, seated at the boarding house dining table alongside 3 traveling salesmen and an elderly couple, Josephine picked at her beef stew while listening to conversations about cattle prices and railroad developments. When she finally mentioned her interest in mining claims, an uncomfortable silence fell. "The mining company offices closed 6 months ago, miss," offered one of the salesmen finally. "Pulled out after the assay reports came back showing barely enough silver to plate a spoon." "But the advertisement was likely printed before they left," the elderly man interjected gently. "Or they're still running them back east to swindle more investors." Josephine felt her cheeks burn with humiliation. Had she truly risked everything on outdated information? She excused herself early, retreating to her room where she spread out her carefully saved maps and investment papers. By lamplight, the promised riches seemed suddenly less certain, the company letterhead less impressive. Morning brought no comfort. The land office confirmed her worst fears. The Pahrump Valley mining enterprise had indeed ceased operations, leaving behind worthless claims and unpaid debts. The clerk, at least, had the decency to look sympathetic. "If it's work you need, miss, the hotel might be hiring," he suggested as Josephine gathered her papers with trembling hands. "I didn't come here to serve drinks or make beds," she replied, struggling to keep her voice level. "I came to build something." Outside, the Nevada sun beat down mercilessly as Josephine wandered aimlessly through Parump's modest streets, the reality of her situation becoming clearer with each step. Her savings would sustain her for perhaps a month after that. "Miss Turner," the now familiar voice made her turn. Hayes Prescott sat atop a chestnut mare, leading a supply-laden wagon. His expression told her he'd heard about her visit to the land office. "Come to say you were right, Mr. Prescott." She couldn't keep the bitterness from her tone. "Actually, I came to offer you a proposition." He dismounted, leading his horse closer. "My ranch needs someone with education, bookkeeping, correspondence, teaching the ranch hands children. The position includes room and board." Josephine stiffened. "I'm not looking for charity." "And I'm not offering any," he replied evenly. "I need someone with skills I don't possess. The last man who kept my accounts cheated me out of nearly $500 before disappearing. I figure a Boston-educated woman might have more integrity. You know nothing about me. I know you're determined enough to cross a continent alone, educated enough to read mining prospectuses, and proud enough to refuse help even when you need it." His amber eyes held her steadily. "Those aren't bad qualities in my estimation." Josephine hesitated, weighing her rapidly diminishing options against this unexpected offer. "Why would you trust a stranger with your finances? Why would you trust a stranger's mining advertisement with your future?" he countered, then softened his tone. "Sometimes we take chances, Miss Turner. I need help and you need time to figure out your next move. It needn't be permanent." The practicality of his offer was undeniable. "What would my duties entail precisely?" Bookkeeping, correspondence, basic education for the children. There are 4 families working my ranch with children aged 6 to 13. You'd have your own cabin, meals, and $15 monthly. It was a fair offer, more than fair, considering her circumstances. Still, Josephine couldn't help feeling that accepting meant admitting defeat. I would require a written agreement, she said finally, and I would not be obligated to stay beyond 3 months if the arrangement proves unsuitable. Hayes nodded. I'll have papers drawn up. Can you be ready to leave tomorrow morning? That night, Josephine packed her trunk with the remnants of one dream and the uncertain beginnings of another. From her window, she watched the Pahrump sunset paint the distant mountains gold, the only gold she was likely to find in this territory. The following morning, Hayes arrived promptly in his wagon. Mrs. Wilson provided a packed lunch and whispered advice. Mr. Prescott's respected hereabouts. You could do worse, dear. The 5-mile journey to the Prescott Ranch took them through surprisingly varied terrain. After the first mile of desert scrub, they entered a landscape where careful irrigation had transformed the parched earth into productive land. The Paiute taught early settlers how to channel the spring water, Hayes explained, noting her interest. This valley has some of the most reliable water sources in Nevada territory. It's more verdant than I expected, Josephine admitted, watching cottonwood trees swaying beside a narrow but steady stream. Most people see only what they expect to see. Hayes guided the horses around a bend, revealing a sweeping vista of the valley. They come looking for silver and gold, missing the real treasure beneath their feet. Fertile soil, water. His voice held reverence. In the desert, water is worth more than any metal. With water comes life, crops, cattle, prosperity. As they crested a small rise, the Prescott Ranch came into view. Unlike the opulent eastern estates Josephine had imagined, it was a collection of practical, well-maintained buildings centered around a modest 2-story house built of local stone and timber. Fields of alfalfa stretched to the east, while cattle grazed in fenced pastures to the west. A windmill turned lazily, pumping water into a large tank. It's not what you pictured, I imagine, Hayes said, seeming to read her thoughts. I confess I expected something more. Rustic, Hayes laughed, a warm sound that surprised her. 5 years ago, it was just a shack and a dream. Every board, every fence post represents hours of labor and reinvestment. As they approached, children darted from between buildings, followed by women who waved welcomingly. A cluster of men paused in their work to observe their arrival. Everyone, this is Miss Turner, Hayes announced as he helped her down from the wagon. She'll be keeping our accounts and teaching the children. Josephine found herself surrounded by curious faces, ranch hands, their wives, and wide-eyed children who stared at her Eastern clothing with undisguised fascination. Names came rapidly. The Garcia family, the Johnsons, the Wilsons, no relation to her former landlady, and the Coopers. Miguel, the ranch foreman, greeted her with a respectful nod. We've prepared the schoolhouse cabin for you, Hayes explained, leading her toward a small structure set slightly apart from the others. It was built last year, but we haven't had a proper teacher. The cabin was simple but thoughtfully furnished: a bed with a patchwork quilt, a writing desk beneath a window, a small bookshelf, and a pot-bellied stove. Adjacent was a larger room with a blackboard and several rough-hewn desks. The children come for lessons 3 mornings a week, Hayes explained. The rest of your time would be spent on ranch accounts and correspondence. It's quite suitable, Josephine managed, overwhelmed by how quickly her circumstances had changed. Get settled in. Dinner's at the main house at 6. Hayes hesitated at the door. And Miss Turner. No one here will think less of you for changing course. Sometimes the journey matters more than the destination we originally had in mind. With that, he left her alone with her thoughts and the vast Nevada sky visible through her window. The following weeks brought Josephine a new rhythm, unlike anything she had known in Boston. She rose with the sun, taught eager children who absorbed knowledge like the desert soil absorbed rare rain, and spent afternoons bringing order to Hayes's chaotic account books. The physical work maintaining her cabin, walking the property, occasionally helping with garden harvesting strengthened her body while the mental challenges engaged her mind. Hayes proved to be a fair employer, neither hovering nor neglecting her. Their interactions remained primarily professional, though dinner conversations at the main house gradually revealed a man of surprising depth. He had fought briefly for the Union, studied agriculture in Chicago, and spent 2 years working cattle drives before establishing his ranch. Unlike many men she had known, he listened as much as he spoke, genuinely interested in her opinions on everything from education to territorial politics. One evening in late September, as they sat on the main house porch watching the sunset, Hayes asked about her abandoned mining aspirations. "I was naive," Josephine admitted, surprising herself with her candor. "I believed I could simply arrive, stake a claim, and transform myself into a mining magnate through determination alone." "It wasn't naivety," Hayes replied thoughtfully. "It was courage. Most dreams worth having require at least one foolish leap of faith. Like building a ranch in the desert," he smiled. "Exactly like that. I arrived with barely more knowledge than you, just a different target. The first year, half my cattle died from drinking alkali water. The second year, a flash flood washed away my entire corn crop. I lived on beans and desperation." "What made you stay?" Hayes gestured toward the sunset, painting the mountains in shades of amber and gold. "This land gets in your blood, and I started to understand its rhythms, its needs. The desert doesn't surrender its treasures easily, but when it does." As if to illustrate his point, a cool evening breeze carried the scent of sage and distant rain. Josephine closed her eyes, inhaling deeply. When she opened them, she found Hayes watching her with an expression that made her heartbeat quicken. "You're starting to see it, aren't you?" he asked softly. "The real gold of this territory." Before she could respond, Miguel approached with urgent news about a breach in the irrigation channel. The moment passed, but something had shifted between them, something Josephine wasn't certain she was ready to acknowledge. October brought an unexpected challenge when a telegram arrived announcing the imminent visit of Hayes's younger sister, Eliza, and her husband William from San Francisco. Hayes seemed unusually agitated as he shared the news with Josephine during their weekly account review. "I haven't seen Eliza in 3 years," he explained, pacing the small office. "She was disappointed in my choice to build a ranch rather than joining their shipping business." "You're concerned about her judgment," Josephine observed. "I'm concerned about presenting my operation professionally." Hayes ran a hand through his hair. "The accounts, the correspondence, I need everything in perfect order. They arrive in 2 weeks and will stay through Thanksgiving." Josephine spent the following days organizing ledgers, drafting quarterly reports, and preparing a comprehensive overview of the ranch's operations. The task gave her deeper insight into Hayes's achievement from near bankruptcy 2 years ago to modest, but growing prosperity today. His careful reinvestment in water management particularly impressed her. While other ranchers expanded their herds at the first sign of profit, Hayes prioritized sustainability. When the Prescott's Eastern-made carriage finally arrived, bringing Eliza and William Jenkins in a cloud of dust and expensive perfume, Josephine found herself unexpectedly protective of Hayes, and the ranch she now considered partly her responsibility. Eliza proved to be a striking woman with Hayes's amber eyes, but none of his warmth. Her initial assessment of the property was delivered with San Francisco superiority barely disguised as compliments. "You've made this so." "Rustic," she remarked during dinner, glancing around the simply furnished dining room. "Though I imagine proper furniture is difficult to obtain in such a remote location." "The furniture is crafted locally," Hayes replied evenly. "Red oak and mesquite. Stronger than anything you'd find in San Francisco showrooms. And Miss Turner, Eliza continued, turning her attention to Josephine. How unusual to find a Boston lady in Nevada. William and I assumed Hayes's bookkeeper would be a retired banker or perhaps a former soldier. Miss Turner's education at the Boston Female Seminary has proven invaluable, Hayes said before Josephine could respond. Her organizational systems have increased our efficiency considerably. William Jenkins, a thin man with calculating eyes, leaned forward. Perhaps you could share these systems with our shipping operations, Miss Turner. We'd compensate you handsomely, certainly better than a cattle ranch could afford. Josephine felt Hayes tense beside her. Mr. Prescott's compensation is more than fair, she replied carefully. And I find the work here uniquely satisfying. How diplomatic, Eliza murmured. Though one wonders what satisfaction there could be in such isolation. No society, no culture, we have both, Hayes interrupted, his patience visibly thinning. Different from San Francisco, certainly, but no less valuable. Miss Turner has established a lending library for the ranch families and organized a harvest festival last month that brought people from 3 neighboring properties. The remainder of the evening passed in similar fashion, with the Jenkins making thinly veiled criticisms, and Hayes defending his choices with increasing firmness. Josephine found herself repeatedly coming to his aid, highlighting the ranch's innovations and growth potential, until William finally began asking genuine questions about water management techniques. Later that night, unable to sleep, Josephine stepped outside her cabin to find Hayes sitting alone on the corral fence, staring at the star-filled sky. "They mean well," he said without turning, somehow knowing it was her. "They just can't understand why anyone would choose this life when there are civilized alternatives." Josephine climbed up to sit beside him. "Some people measure wealth only in dollars and social standing. And how do you measure it, Miss Turner?" He looked at her then, his expression open and curious. "Increasingly by independence and purpose," she admitted. "Things I thought gold would provide, but perhaps never would have." Hayes smiled, the moonlight silvering his profile. "When I first saw you step off that stagecoach, all determination despite the dust and exhaustion, I recognized something of myself in you. A fool chasing an improbable dream, a soul unwilling to settle for the expected path." He hesitated, then added softly, "I knew that day that you belonged here, even if you didn't yet know it yourself." The air between them seemed charged with possibility. Josephine found herself acutely aware of his proximity, the warmth radiating from him in the cool night air, the steady rhythm of his breathing. "I should return to my cabin," she said finally, though she made no move to leave. "Josephine." It was the first time he had used her given name. "Whatever my sister and William might imply, what you've brought to this ranch to all of us is invaluable. Thank you." She slipped down from the fence, suddenly needing distance to collect her thoughts. "Good night, Hayes." As she walked away, she felt his gaze follow her, warming her back like the Nevada sun. The Jenkins visit stretched into November, bringing with it unexpected complications. William, having seen the potential in Hayes's water management system, proposed a partnership that would expand the ranch operation significantly. The offer included substantial capital investment, but required Hayes to adopt more aggressive land acquisition strategies that would displace several neighboring small ranchers. "It's simple economics," William argued during a tense discussion that Josephine was asked to document. "These small operations can't compete. You'd be doing them a favor by offering fair market value before they fail completely." "These are my neighbors and friends," Hayes countered. "People who have worked this land for a generation. There's room for all of us if we cooperate rather than consolidate." "Sentimental thinking has no place in business," William dismissed. "Miss Turner, surely your bookkeeping has shown the inefficiencies of the current arrangement." Josephine glanced at her ledgers. "Actually, the cooperative irrigation agreements Hayes has established with neighboring ranches have reduced water management costs by nearly 30% compared to properties that maintain independent systems. See, even your schoolteacher understands the value of cooperation, Hayes said triumphantly. William narrowed his eyes. I begin to wonder where Miss Turner's loyalties truly lie in these discussions. With the facts, Mr. Jenkins, Josephine replied calmly, as they appear in the accounts. The meeting ended without resolution, but that evening, Eliza sought out Josephine as she worked in the schoolhouse. My brother values your opinion, she stated without preamble. Perhaps too much. Josephine set down her pen carefully. Mr. Prescott values accurate information, which I provide. Is that all you provide? Eliza's implication hung in the air. William and I have noticed how he looks at you. It's inappropriate for an employer, wouldn't you agree? Your brother has been nothing but professional and respectful, Josephine replied, heat rising in her cheeks. For now, perhaps. Eliza moved closer, lowering her voice. Hayes has always been idealistic to the point of self-destruction. This partnership could secure his future, but he's rejecting it partly because of your influence. Mr. Prescott makes his own decisions. He believes in this romantic notion of ranching community, cooperation, living in harmony with the land. Eliza's tone made these sound like character flaws. It's admirable but ultimately unsustainable. William is offering him security. At what cost? Josephine challenged. The displacement of families, the consolidation of land into fewer hands, the transformation of neighbors into employees. Progress requires change, Miss Turner. If you truly care for my brother's welfare, you'll encourage him to accept our offer. After Eliza left, Josephine sat for a long time contemplating her words. Did she have undue influence over Hayes? Had her growing attachment to the ranch, and to him, clouded her professional judgment? The prospect of the Jenkins' departure after Thanksgiving filled her with relief, but also apprehension about what decisions might follow. The situation came to a head the following week when an early snowstorm threatened the high pastures where some of Hayes's cattle still grazed. The ranch hands prepared for an emergency roundup, and to everyone's surprise, Hayes asked Josephine to accompany them. Your organizational skills would be valuable, he explained. We'll need to track which animals come from which pasture to monitor grazing impacts. Despite Eliza's visible disapproval, Josephine agreed, exchanging her usual skirts for borrowed canvas trousers and a heavy coat. The expedition would take 3 days, with nights spent in line cabins positioned strategically throughout the property. This is completely inappropriate, Eliza hissed to her brother as they prepared to depart. A gentlewoman alone with ranch hands, she won't be alone. Miguel's wife Maria is coming as cook, and Miss Turner will have private accommodations, Hayes replied firmly. This is a working ranch, Eliza, not a San Francisco parlor. Everyone contributes according to their abilities. The cattle drive proved to be an education, unlike anything Josephine had experienced. The physical demands riding for hours through increasingly cold weather, helping to guide reluctant cattle down narrow mountain paths, tested her endurance. Yet she found unexpected joy in the work, in the harmony between riders, horses, and even the stubborn cattle. On the second night, sheltered in a small cabin while snow fell outside, Josephine sat near the fire recording the day's tallies. Hayes joined her after ensuring the men had settled the herd for the night. You've impressed them, he said quietly, warming his hands by the flame. Miguel says you ride better than most city men he's trained. Josephine smiled, massaging her sore shoulders. I may not sit a horse as gracefully tomorrow. Here. Hayes moved behind her, his hands hesitating above her shoulders. May I? At her nod, his fingers began working the knotted muscles, strong but gentle. My mother taught me this, he explained. She came west as a bride, unprepared for ranch life, said the first year nearly broke her body but never her spirit. She sounds remarkable, she was. His voice softened. She would have liked you, I think. She valued education and independence in equal measure. Josephine closed her eyes, acutely aware of his touch and the intimacy of the moment. What would she think of William's proposal? Hayes's hands stilled briefly. She always said land wasn't just property, it was responsibility, a trust to be maintained for those who would come after us. His massage resumed. William sees only resources to be maximized. He doesn't understand that this land, these people, are more than entries in a ledger. Is that why you asked me to come, to see beyond the numbers? Partly, he admitted, and partly because I value your perspective. You see this place with fresh eyes, yet you understand what makes it special. Josephine turned to face him, their proximity suddenly overwhelming in the firelit cabin. And what is that, Hayes? What makes it special? His amber eyes reflected the dancing flames. The same quality I recognized in you that first day: resilience, potential, the ability to flourish where others see only hardship. His voice dropped lower. A kind of beauty that reveals itself slowly to those patient enough to look beneath the surface. The air between them seemed to vibrate with unspoken feelings. Josephine found herself leaning slightly toward him, drawn by a force as natural and inevitable as gravity. A sudden gust rattled the cabin windows, breaking the moment. Hayes stood abruptly, moving toward the door. I should check the horses once more before the snow gets worse. Hayes, Josephine called as he reached for the latch. Thank you for showing me this, all of this. He paused, his expression complex. There's still much more I'd like to show you, Josephine. If you're willing to stay beyond our 3-month agreement. After he left, Josephine sat alone, watching flames dance over cedar logs. She had come west seeking gold, imagining that wealth would give her the independence and purpose she craved. Instead, she had found something far more precious in this valley: a community, meaningful work, and perhaps, if she were brave enough to acknowledge it, the beginnings of love. The cattle drive concluded successfully the following day, with all animals safely relocated to protected winter pastures. Upon their return to the ranch, they found William and Eliza preparing for departure, their visit cut short by business matters in San Francisco. We'll leave our offer open until the new year, William told Hayes as their luggage was loaded. Consider it a Christmas gift, the opportunity to transform this modest operation into something truly significant. I'll consider it, Hayes promised, though his tone suggested otherwise. As the Jenkins carriage disappeared down the road, Hayes turned to Josephine with visible relief. I thought they'd never leave. They care for you in their way, she offered diplomatically. They care for the Hayes Prescott they wish I would become. He sighed, then brightened. But enough about that. Thanksgiving is in 3 days, and I've invited neighbors from miles around. I hope you'll help organize the celebration. The Thanksgiving gathering proved to be the most joyous event Josephine had experienced since arriving in Nevada. Families from surrounding ranches and farms brought dishes representing their diverse backgrounds: traditional American turkey, alongside Mexican tamales, German strudel, and Chinese dumplings made by a family that had remained after railroad construction. The schoolhouse was transformed into a banquet hall, with tables arranged in a horseshoe and decorated with pine cones, dried wildflowers, and candles. Hayes asked Josephine to sit beside him at the head table, a position that drew curious but approving glances from the assembled guests. After the meal, as fiddle music inspired impromptu dancing, Hayes led Josephine outside to the relative quiet of the November evening. I have something to show you, he said, guiding her toward a small hill overlooking the ranch. The best view on the property. They climbed in comfortable silence, their breath forming clouds in the cold air. At the summit, Hayes pointed toward the valley spread below them, now dotted with lamplight from the scattered buildings. When I first came here, I stood on this spot and saw nothing but sagebrush and stone, he said. But there was a spring at the base of this hill, pure, cold water bubbling up from deep underground. That spring became the heart of everything you see now. You've built something remarkable, Josephine said sincerely, not just me. Everyone down there, they've all contributed. Hayes turned to face her directly. Including you, Josephine, especially you. I've only been here a few months. And in that time, you've transformed our accounting systems, established a proper school, organized our first community celebration, and he hesitated and brought something into my life I didn't realize was missing. Josephine felt her heart quicken. Hayes, let me finish, please. His expression was earnest in the moonlight. When you arrived seeking gold, I thought you were chasing the wrong treasure. But now I understand that you were simply looking for what I found here, a place to belong, a purpose that matters, the freedom to build something meaningful. He took her gloved hands in his. Our 3-month agreement ends next week. I'd like to offer you a permanent position, but I need you to understand that my offer is complicated by personal feelings that have grown far beyond professional respect. Josephine's breath caught. What exactly are you offering, Hayes? Initially, a partnership. I'd like to formally make you part owner of the educational and community development aspects of the ranch. Eventually. He swallowed visibly. Eventually, I hope you might consider a more personal partnership as well, though I understand if that's not what you want. The directness of his proposal, so different from the manipulative courtships she had experienced in Boston, touched Josephine deeply. Here was a man offering her not just his heart, but respect for her mind and abilities. I came west seeking independence, she said carefully. I feared that accepting help, even employment, meant surrendering that goal. Independence doesn't mean standing alone, Josephine. It means having the freedom to choose your connections, your commitments. She studied his face, this man who had first appeared to her as the embodiment of the frontier, and now represented something far more complex, a blend of strength and tenderness, practicality and vision. I accept your offer of partnership, she said finally, the professional one to start. As for the personal, she stepped closer, emboldened by the emotion in his eyes. I believe that possibility deserves careful exploration. Hayes's smile transformed his face. Slowly, giving her every opportunity to step away, he leaned down and brushed his lips against hers, a kiss as gentle as desert rain and as promising as spring. Winter descended on the Pahrump Valley with unexpected intensity that year. Heavy snows isolated the ranch for weeks at a time, but the community Hayes had built proved resilient. The schoolhouse became a center of activity, with Josephine organizing reading circles for adults in the evenings after children's lessons concluded. Her partnership with Hayes quickly proved its value. Her systematic approach complemented his intuitive understanding of the land, and together they drafted plans for expanding educational opportunities while maintaining the ranch's core operations. Their personal relationship developed more cautiously. Hayes courted her with frontier directness, taking her to see winter-blooming desert plants in sheltered canyons, teaching her to track wildlife through snow, bringing her books ordered specially from San Francisco. They shared long conversations by firelight, discovering the surprising parallels in their journeys despite their different backgrounds. As Christmas approached, Hayes received another letter from William, reiterating the partnership offer with a thinly veiled warning about the financial risks of remaining independent. Josephine found Hayes studying the letter late one evening in his office, his expression troubled. "You're considering it," she observed, setting down the tea she had brought him. "I'm considering what's best for everyone here," he corrected. "This winter has been harder than most. If it continues, we may lose cattle despite our preparations." Josephine sat across from him. "Show me the projections." Together, they reviewed the ranch accounts, calculating scenarios based on various weather patterns and cattle survival rates. Even in the worst case, Hayes's careful management had created enough reserve to weather the crisis. "What William doesn't understand," Josephine said finally, "is that true security doesn't come from size or wealth alone. It comes from adaptability, from community support, from diverse approaches." Hayes looked at her with growing wonder. "That's precisely what I've tried to build here." Not an empire, but a sustainable future. Then write to William, decline his offer, and then, Josephine hesitated, gathering her courage, then ask me a different question entirely. Hayes set down the papers slowly. Josephine Turner, are you suggesting what I think you're suggesting? I'm suggesting that life is uncertain, winter is long, and I've discovered that independence can coexist beautifully with partnership when built on mutual respect. Hayes rounded the desk and knelt beside her chair, taking her hands. I've been waiting for the perfect moment, but perhaps there's no such thing on a working ranch. Perfect moments are created, not found, she replied softly. Then let's create one now. He reached into his pocket and withdrew a small object, a ring fashioned from twisted gold wire with a small, perfect pearl. This was my mother's. The gold came from a creek on our property, not the bonanza most miners seek, but enough for something precious and enduring. Josephine felt tears gather as he continued. You came west seeking gold, but I hope you found something more valuable. I love you, Josephine Turner, your determination, your intelligence, your growing love for this land. Will you marry me and continue building this life together? Yes, she whispered, her voice catching. Yes, I will. Their wedding in February brought together the entire valley community despite continuing winter storms. The schoolhouse was transformed once again, this time with pine boughs and white ribbons creating a chapel-like atmosphere. Josephine wore a dress of deep blue velvet, impractical for the frontier perhaps, but Hayes had insisted on ordering it specially, saying, "Some occasions deserve extravagance." Judge Patterson traveled from the county seat to perform the ceremony, combining legal authority with frontier practicality in his brief but meaningful service. As Hayes and Josephine exchanged vows, snow began falling outside, adding a hushed magic to the proceedings. I take you, Josephine, as my partner in all things, Hayes said, his voice carrying clearly through the crowded room. I promise to respect your independence even as we build our interdependence, to value your mind as much as your heart, to show you daily that the richest treasures aren't found in mines, but in how we live upon this land. Josephine's response, equally heartfelt, acknowledged her transformation. I take you, Hayes, as my compass and companion. I came west seeking one kind of fortune, but found another far more precious. I promise to build with you, to learn with you, and to love this land as you've taught me to. The celebration afterward continued well into the night, with music, dancing, and a feast that demonstrated the community's generosity despite winter's hardships. As guests departed, many whispered to Josephine some variation of what Mrs. Garcia said most directly, "You've brought something special to this valley, Mrs. Prescott, something we needed as much as water." Spring arrived gradually, then suddenly, as it often does in desert regions. One morning in late March, Josephine woke to find the valley transformed, wildflowers carpeting what had been barren earth weeks before, their purples and yellows creating a natural tapestry across the landscape. The desert's wedding gift, Hayes said, finding her standing entranced on their porch. It happens perhaps once every 5 years when winter rains come in just the right pattern and spring warms the earth at just the right pace. It's magnificent, Josephine breathed, leaning into his embrace. Like gold spread across the land. Speaking of gold, Hayes said, his tone suspiciously casual. I thought we might ride out to Willow Canyon today. There's something there I've been meaning to show you. Curious, Josephine agreed. They packed a simple picnic and rode for nearly 2 hours, following a narrow trail that wound through increasingly dramatic rock formations. Finally, they reached a hidden canyon where a small stream trickled between willow trees, showing their first spring green. This is where my father found the gold for my mother's ring, Hayes explained, helping her dismount. Not enough for mining operations, but perfect for the occasional personal treasure. He led her to the stream and showed her how to swirl water in a shallow pan, watching for the telltale glint among the sediment. On her third attempt, Josephine gasped as tiny gold flakes appeared, catching sunlight like miniature stars. "There's your Nevada gold," Hayes said softly. "Not the fortune you imagined, perhaps, but authentic, like everything else here." Josephine looked up at him, this man who had shown her that wealth could be measured in so many ways beyond currency. "It's perfect." They spent the afternoon panning just enough gold to fill a small vial, a souvenir of the dream that had brought her west and the reality that had proved far richer. "I've been thinking," Josephine said as they sat beside the stream sharing their picnic. "About William's concern that our approach isn't sustainable." Hayes raised an eyebrow, having second thoughts. "No, quite the opposite." She pulled out a small notebook where she had been sketching ideas. "I believe we could create something here that demonstrates a different kind of prosperity. The school is just the beginning. What if we established a proper learning center, not just for children, but for adults wanting to understand better ranching techniques, water management, desert agriculture?" Hayes studied her drawings with growing interest. "You're proposing we become teachers of the very things we've been learning ourselves." "Exactly. The future of this territory depends on people understanding how to work with the land rather than against it. Your methods are proving successful, why not share that knowledge?" By summer, their vision had begun taking concrete form. The original schoolhouse was expanded, and a demonstration garden established where visitors could learn desert-appropriate farming techniques. Hayes arranged for agricultural experts from the Territorial College to visit, while Josephine developed a curriculum that combined practical skills with fundamental education. Word spread, bringing visitors from as far as California and Utah, some skeptical, others eager to learn. The Prescott Ranch became known as a place where frontier innovation merged with sustainable practices, where community cooperation replaced cutthroat competition. In August, nearly a year after Josephine had first stepped off the stagecoach, the ranch hosted its first formal educational symposium, drawing newspaper coverage and attention from territorial officials. As Josephine guided visitors through the demonstration projects, she overheard a conversation between two well-dressed San Francisco investors. "Prescott turned down a fortune from his brother-in-law to build this instead," one remarked. "Hard to understand the man's priorities." "I don't know," the other replied thoughtfully. "Look around. These people aren't just surviving, they're thriving. Maybe he understands something about real value that we're only beginning to grasp." That evening, as the symposium concluded with a community dinner under desert stars, Hayes found Josephine standing alone, watching firelight illuminate the faces of their neighbors and new friends. "Penny for your thoughts, Mrs. Prescott," he asked, slipping his arm around her waist. "I was thinking about the young woman who arrived here last year," she replied, leaning against him. "How certain she was that gold was the only treasure worth seeking. And now she understands that the richest veins aren't found underground." Josephine turned in his arms. "They're found in partnerships, in community, in building something that will outlast us." Hayes brushed a strand of hair from her face, his touch still sending warmth through her after months of marriage. "I have news that might add to those riches," he said quietly. "Doctor Matthews confirmed it this morning." Josephine's eyes widened as his meaning became clear. "Truly, we're going to have a child." His smile was answer enough. Josephine pressed her hand to her still flat stomach, overwhelmed by this newest treasure. "Next spring," he said. "When the wildflowers return." They stood together in comfortable silence, watching their community celebrate around them. The future stretching before them was not without challenges. Desert life ensured that, but they would face them together, building something neither could have created alone. "I never found my gold mine," Josephine murmured finally. "No," Hayes agreed, his arms tightening around her. "You found something far more valuable." "We both did," she corrected gently. "A life worth more than all the gold in Nevada." The following spring brought new life to the Prescott Ranch in more ways than one. As wildflowers again carpeted the valley floor, Josephine gave birth to a son they named Thomas Henry Prescott, his middle name honoring Hayes's father, who had first seen the potential in this seemingly barren landscape. The baby thrived in the desert air, his curious eyes taking in the expansive skies and endless horizons that would shape his understanding of the world. Josephine found motherhood challenging but deeply rewarding, especially with the support of the women who had become her friends and advisors. Maria Garcia proved particularly helpful, sharing generations of wisdom about raising children in frontier conditions. Hayes proved to be a devoted father, often carrying Thomas in a special sling while conducting ranch business, pointing out cattle, wildlife, and plant life to the attentive infant. He should know this land from the beginning, Hayes explained. Feel it as part of himself. The educational center continued to grow, with Josephine managing operations even while adapting to motherhood. They hired an assistant teacher, a young woman from Carson City with progressive ideas about education, allowing Josephine to focus on curriculum development and administration. In the fall of Thomas's first year, the Prescott Ranch received unexpected visitors William and Eliza Jenkins, arriving without announcement in their fine carriage. Their initial coolness thawed somewhat at the sight of their nephew, with Eliza in particular showing a softer side as she cradled the baby. San Francisco society has been discussing your educational initiatives, William admitted over dinner. Several influential families are considering sending their sons here to learn practical aspects of land management before university. That wasn't our intended audience, Hayes replied, but they'd be welcome if they come with genuine interest. Later, while Hayes showed William recent improvements to the irrigation system, Eliza helped Josephine put Thomas to bed. I didn't understand before, Eliza said quietly, watching the baby sleep. What Hayes was building here, what you saw in this place. It's not always easy to recognize different forms of wealth, Josephine replied without judgment. No, it isn't. Eliza touched Thomas's tiny hand. William and I have everything society values: a fine house, investments, social position, yet no children, despite years of hoping. Josephine felt unexpected compassion for this woman who had once seemed so coldly superior. Perhaps you might visit more often. Thomas should know his aunt and uncle. I'd like that. Eliza's smile transformed her face, revealing her resemblance to Hayes. And perhaps I could contribute to your educational programs. I do have connections with several publishing houses. By the time the Jenkins departed, a genuine reconciliation had begun, with promises of books for the school library and regular correspondence. Hayes watched their carriage disappear with mixed emotions. I never expected William to admit I might have been right about anything, he marveled. Sometimes people need to see concrete results before they can appreciate a different vision, Josephine observed. We've built something tangible now, something even San Francisco investors can recognize as valuable. The years that followed brought both challenges and joys. A second child joined their family 2 years after Thomas, a daughter they named Alina Rose, whose determined personality reminded Hayes of Josephine on the day they first met. The ranch weathered droughts, economic downturns, and political changes in the territory, but the foundation they had built proved solid. As Nevada achieved statehood and the Civil War reshaped the nation, the Prescott Ranch became increasingly recognized as a model of sustainable development. Hayes was appointed to a territorial agricultural commission, while Josephine's educational methods were adopted by schools throughout the region. On the 10th anniversary of Josephine's arrival in Pahrump, they held a celebration that brought together hundreds of people whose lives had been touched by their work. Former students, neighboring ranchers, visiting dignitaries, and their own children now aged 9 and 7 gathered to commemorate not just personal success but community achievement. As twilight descended and music began, Hayes led Josephine to the small hill where he had proposed a decade earlier. "You remember what you were thinking when you first arrived here?" he asked, both of them gazing out at the valley now dotted with many more lights than had existed then. "I was thinking I'd made a terrible mistake," Josephine admitted with a laugh. "That I'd abandoned security for a fool's errand." And now, she turned to face the man who had shown her treasures far more valuable than the gold she'd sought. A man whose face showed the lines of desert sun, and whose hands bore the calluses of honest work, but whose heart had remained as steadfast as the mountains surrounding their valley. "Now I know it was the wisest decision of my life," she said softly. "Not because it led to prosperity as the world measures it, but because it led to you, to our children, to this community we've built together." Hayes took her hands, his expression serious. "There's something I've been wanting to give you." From his pocket, he withdrew a small object wrapped in soft cloth. "I had this made from the gold we collected at Willow Canyon over the years." Unwrapping it, Josephine found a locket shaped like a book. Inside were miniature portraits of Thomas and Alina on one side, and on the other, an inscription. "The real treasures of Nevada found not by seeking gold, but by building a life of true value." Tears filled Josephine's eyes as Hayes fastened it around her neck. "It's perfect," she whispered. "Like the woman who wears it," he replied, drawing her close. "The woman who came seeking one fortune and created another far more precious." Below them, their children raced across the gathering with the freedom of those born to open spaces. Around them, the community they had nurtured continued its celebration. And above, stars emerged in the desert sky, the same stars that had witnessed Josephine's arrival a decade earlier, when she had stepped off a stagecoach with dreams of gold and instead discovered the richest vein of all. A life built on love, purpose, and the true treasures of the Western land.